Dave Pasch, it's great to have you back here on Sports Spectrum. Good to see you, my friend.
You too. It's been a while, Jace.
Yeah, it's been a little while. I think the last time we had you on was a week into the pandemic. And even that year alone, a lot changed after our conversation. But certainly 4 years later, 4.5 years later, there's a lot to go over with you. I think the first place to start, because I really like starting with faith now. That was something when we were starting this podcast early on that I didn't do. And I kind of always thought, that's the center of both of our lives. Let's just start there and make sure we get first things first in each of these conversations. So let's start with Christ in your life. Tell me about who he is and how he's been working in Dave Pasch's life recently.
Yeah. I go back, Jason. I was not raised in the church. I was an agnostic, probably close to an atheist. I just didn't care. I didn't really think about God in any sort of form or context. And then when I became a believer, obviously everything changed. And I think over the years, it's for me a lot about paying attention to the little things. I think we are in a society where, we're just overseas in a foreign country where when you're in a lot of small towns in a foreign country, you start to see how, really things were in some ways in biblical times in this sense. People were born in a small town. They were raised in a small town. They worked in that town. They died in that town. They didn't have these visions or dreams of having incredible monetary success or vocational success. They just went about their business day to day. And I think sometimes we all get caught up and this is a great country, obviously, and it affords us a lot, things that a lot of other countries don't provide.
Yeah.
Not that this country's perfect, but it's far from that. But America is great in that it provides us things that I think most people in other countries envy. And that's success and fame and ways to support your family. And I think sometimes we get caught up in that too much. And sometimes we kind of mix that with the gospel when it's not. And it becomes almost too personal and less corporate, if that makes sense. Clearly, the gospel is personal, but the gospel is more about an announcement of what has happened, what is happening, and how we respond to that. And oftentimes we think of, well, it's about me, it's about getting saved, it's about going to heaven, and less about being a participant in the kingdom. And a kingdom that's here, and a kingdom that is about Jesus Christ and what he is doing in the world and how he is moving in the world and how we are to be agents in that world of love and grace and mercy to restore all things to him. And so it's a long answer to your question about what he's doing in my life, but I think what he's doing in my life is teaching me in the little things that's where your faith grows. That's where you have impact. I'm not saying that looking at a mega church and seeing tons of people, I'm not saying that's not good. Of course it's good. But I think for most of us, God works in our relationships, in our household, our relationships at our workplace, and how we can impact people and how he wants to use us. And it could just be with one person that we're in contact with a lot. And I think the biggest thing is, how are we responding? How are we listening? How are we behaving and acting in those little moments? Because once those faith muscles grow in those little things, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be bigger things, but I think we grow in how we respond in those little things, because that's what most of our lives are about, these little moments and how we handle them. And I just see constantly things and opportunities that, okay, God, what are you trying to do here? And, this bigger picture you see, I don't see it. How can I be faithful in that small moment and respond in a way that honors you and honors the person that you are reaching out to through me, perhaps?
Yeah, that's really good, because I think, how long have you been a believer? Maybe 30 years, 25 years?
Yeah,
Somewhere?
I became a Christian in the late 90s. Yes.
Right. And I was 2001. So we're around the same age and around the same time, if you will, in our lives. And I can tell you, I failed at that miserably for the first maybe even a decade. of walking with Christ of thinking it was about me. And look what happened to me, and look at how different I am, and hey, I don't curse anymore, and look at how much I'm going to church, or I'm, reading my Bible. And I still think all of us struggle with that on some level every day, which is the beauty and the grace and the mercy of God every day when we go to him. But I think comes a point when you start to wrap your head around the idea that we're just a little part in his story. He's not a little part in our story. Does that make sense?
It does. 100%. Yes. And
Yeah.
I think too, I love the movies. I know you're a big movie guy. I don't watch a ton of movies, but then there's certain movies I like. I'm weird like this, and I'll watch them over and over again.
Yes.
But there's an aspect in movies of kind of finding out your purpose and how you fit in this big picture. And there's some truth there, but also I think we can focus too much on that. And okay, what's my purpose in God's kingdom? Well, I think our purpose is pretty clear in Scripture. I think we spend a little too much time, trying to figure out, well, what's my purpose? Well, how about just go do something?
Yeah.
In terms of maybe this is what you think you should do based on what Scripture teaches us to do. If that's serving, if that's doing something kind for another person, if that's, I really think I should call this person. I haven't talked to this person in a while and just check in on them. That's part of our purpose. I think we spend way too much time on, what's God doing in my life and what's the purpose of, what does he want me to do here, instead of just going out and doing what he's already called us to do, what's already laid out there in Scripture. And when we do that, again, it's those little things. When we do that, I don't think we'll spend as much time worrying about me and the individual, because again, it's a corporate thing. It's not an individual thing. And I think we focused way too much on that. I know I have. Like you, I struggled mightily early on. I think always trying to figure out, okay, what are you doing in my life and where do you want me, as opposed to, okay, your word's pretty clear. Love God, love people. Okay.
Yes.
Let's go do it.
Let's start with that. We mess that up sometimes because of social media. I think has played a big role in that, in terms of us touting our chest and look what we've done and look what we get to do and look who I am. And then I think there's also just the idea of, I don't know. I think we just get caught up sometimes in, we think we love God and love people. We forget the second part. It also says, love your neighbor as yourself, which means there's a part that you should love yourself as well and take care of yourself and care about you, the person. That's the mental health side of it. But to love other people, and that doesn't say love the people that you like, or love the people that look like you, or love the people that you get to work with every day, or whatever. It just says love people. And I remember when we talked last time 4 years ago, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes so people can listen. It was immediately after COVID hit, and everybody was kind of like, what can we do? It's been a week since everything was shut down. That's how quickly it was that you and I talked. It was a week after, and nobody knew what was going to happen. And I remember you saying, well, why don't you think about maybe getting some gift cards for some people and being able to, put some food, help restaurants be able to feed people. They can go and they can get curbside. All these things seem so long ago, Dave, don't they? But It was just trying to think of, how can I help others? Because Jesus, when he comes down to his ministry, it really was about sacrifice. But he said, I came not to be served, but to serve.
Yeah. And I think we all, as believers, need to remember that, and it seems simple to say, but it is hard. Every human being is made in the image of God. And when we start to look at other people as people who are special and that they are created in God's image,
yeah,
and his desire is to, and that's part of what the gospel is, the restoration of all things. We start to move in that direction and thinking that way, it changes our focus. It changes from, okay, I need to accumulate stuff. I need to seek success for me. And then it changes to, okay, well, am I giving enough? Am I giving enough financially? Am I giving enough of my time? Am I giving, you mentioned the word sacrifice. Am I sacrificing enough? Because in a strange way, we're told that's where contentment and fulfillment lie. And also that's the heart of God. Jesus being fully God, but also fully man, he is the example. not just because this is what we should do or this is a way to be religious, but this is how to be fulfilled. This is what humanity is about, that Jesus is also the perfect man, and how we are to, as imperfect people,
Yeah,
grow and move in that direction. And that's in giving, that's in doing for others. And we don't like that. There's a part of us that, we struggle with that, right? All the time. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier about the little things, the daily moments of, okay, how am I making this moment and this less about me and more about somebody else?
totally. Dave Pasch is with us here on Sports Spectrum. You're obviously around a lot of different people and different backgrounds, producers, directors, analysts, you name it, et cetera, that you work with on a daily, weekly basis on all the different things, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and all the different roles you have. What is the best way that you've seen in staying true to yourself as a believer in Christ, right? Being a Christian and living that out in the work that you do, knowing that there's going to be people that don't believe anything that you believe. And it's also not necessarily a pulpit or a place to do that because you're hired to do a job, but you still want to represent Christ everywhere you go. What are some of the things that you've seen over the years that have helped you?
Yeah. I think early on, I was a disaster when I became a Christian. I think I was somebody that, and this is not, a biblical way of behaving, but I was in your face. And I think too, being somebody who is Jewish and a Christian, you start to think, well, I've got to, tell everybody in my family and other people that I know that are Jewish, like, hey, I believe that, Jesus fulfills everything we've been taught and
Right.
studied and were preached to about our whole lives. And so, especially with my family, I was so over the top, and that's not the way to do things. And I think over time, I've learned that, biblically, so much of it is God will provide those opportunities, and that we are called to, again, live each day, open to what he's doing in our lives and how he wants to use us. And Chris Spielman, who I worked with for a long time and is a close friend who is doing great things with the Detroit Lions, but was in our business for a long time. He and I actually was talking about this with him the other day. It's a good reminder. He always says, expose, don't impose. That's biblical, right? How you're
Yes.
living your life. There will be opportunities to share, to talk, and I just feel like it's something that we think we've got to grab people sometimes by the lapels and say, brother, are you saved? And that's, again, not how we're supposed to do things. That's not how Jesus did things. It's, I think sometimes we focus on maybe, what John the Baptist did and kind of forget about the context of what was going on. Or you read the Old Testament prophets and see what they did. But there's a context to that, that clearly is different than the context that we are in the United States in the year 2024.
Yeah.
So, for me, so much of it is just being who you are, being real, and that, hey, I'm a flawed person, far from perfect. I'm somebody saved by grace. Doesn't give me an excuse to live a certain way, but I need to be, while being uncompromising as a believer, I need to be me. I need to be real. And I mean, that's what attracts people, I think, when you're just yourself, when there's humility, kindness, people see your flaws. That's okay. I'm not saying you need to go try to fail,
Right.
as a human and as a Christ follower, but being real, I think that attracts people. When you think about Jesus and his ministry, I mean, there were things. There was a way about him, obviously, for who he is, but also how he handled himself and the disciples after him, something clearly they had to learn and grow into because it's not natural. But how they treated each other, how they treated other people, there was an attraction there.
Yeah.
And I
Friendship.
think,
It was relationship.
yeah, relationship driven. And again, it doesn't mean that everyone is going to accept what you believe. But that's not our job. Our job is to be the people God's called us to be. And then if there is an opportunity, be ready. 1 Peter 3:15.
That's right.
Always be ready for the hope that lies within you. Uh, and remember, we're to do that with gentleness and respect. Sometimes we forget that part of it. I
Totally.
certainly did early on. So,
Yes.
it's just, and again, I know at some point we're going to talk about Bill Walton.
Yeah.
And I think one of the interesting things with Bill, he and I have very different worldviews, but we had a great friendship and a love for one another. But I never really pushed. We rarely talked about those things.
Right.
Um, but that didn't take away from the friendship. It didn't take away from the relationship. And again, I wasn't trying, like my goal was not to try like, oh, I'm going to at some point here try to get you to see the world the way I see it. I was just trying to live each day and be a friend and show my care for him. And we developed a great relationship despite the fact that our worldviews are very, very different.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up Bill. I just want to repeat what you said earlier, what Chris Spielman actually said. Expose, not impose, for people listening. Maybe they were like, I got to write that down, because I wrote that down. I think that's a beautiful way to go about, hey, let's just be yourself. Don't try to push your faith or your beliefs on other people. That's never going to work. And then, like you said in 1 Peter 3:15, one of my favorite Bible verses, always be prepared to give a reason for the hope that's within you. Be gentle and respectful in doing that.
Yeah.
As you were kind of, this year has been interesting for you, especially the relationship with Bill, because this year, 2024, you actually called games with him. And then certainly in late May, we saw that he had passed away. And that was such a shock to so many. And you were the first person, I'm sure a lot of people would say the same thing, that I thought of in regards to Bill. I think I may have shared this with you, but I spent 2 times with Bill Walton, and multiple times on the phone when I was a call screener and producer at ESPN Radio. My favorite story is Bill answered the phone. We put him on the air with Chuck Wilson and Chris Moore on game night on ESPN Radio back in 2002. And Chris and Chuck welcomed Bill and then didn't get another word in for 17 minutes, and then said, okay, Bill, thanks for joining us. And that was it. Bill just talked for 17 minutes. I also spent time with him in San Diego and saw him ride his bike to the Dan Patrick set to do Super Bowl hit at the Super Bowl ESPN radio setup that we had there. And then I spent a moment where he was in one of the small bureau cam rooms in Bristol, and we had him on Outside the Lines to talk about something, and I was producing, and I sat in a room with Bill Walton, just me and him, for like 40 minutes, and we talked for probably 30 of those 40 until he actually had to do the hit about Larry Bird, who's my hero. You can see the picture behind me of Larry Bird, and I know that's his guy. He talks about Larry so much when he talked about his career with the Celtics. I'll shut up now because I really want to hear, just for you, the memories. And I was thinking too, what was it like to prepare for a broadcast with him as your partner? I mean, did you just go in and say, I know this is going to go off the rails every single time and that's okay, let it happen? Like, what was the preparation like having him as a partner on basketball games?
Well, I think I've told the story many times of kind of the origin of how everything kind of came together. I'd done, on my first year in the NBA in 2006, I had done a few games with Bill. Mike Tirico was Bill's primary partner.
Yes.
And I was like, I think there were 5 play-by-play guys on ESPN for NBA coverage, and I was the 5th. I was the newbie, and so I would kind of bounce around and have a regular partner. And I probably did 10 or 12 games that first year, and maybe 4 or 5 of them are with Bill. And some of that was because, Mike was doing Monday Night Football. So if there was a game on a Wednesday, Mike maybe wouldn't do it. And so I would do it. And I was just happy to be working NBA. I was happy to be sitting next to Bill Walton. I'd grown up watching Bill with Snapper Jones go at it on NBC. And so I was just kind of in awe, obviously, of what Bill accomplished as a player, but also as a broadcaster. And we're doing this game, and the Cavaliers were playing. It was a young LeBron James, and the story. I'm trying to remember all the details. My memory's not great when it comes to this stuff. Some people, like Bill, has an incredible memory. I work with Hubie Brown a lot. Hubie's 90 years old, and he still remembers stuff from 60 years ago like it was yesterday. I can't, but I'm pretty sure it was LeBron. I know it was one of the players. I'm pretty sure it was LeBron because he wore a headband at the time, took his headband off and threw it towards the scorer's table. Bill starts going off. That's a technical foul. You can't do that. Ref, what are you doing? And I let him go. I didn't say a word because, again, I'm like, I'm happy to be here. This is great. I'm sitting next to Bill. Just shut up. Well,
Yes.
Tirico called me. Mike called me, I think it was the next day, and said, you have to stop him. That's your job, to stop him.
Stop him.
So when we get the Pac-12 contract, Mark Gross calls. Mark has been a long time executive at ESPN. This is 2011, I think, 2012. Mark calls us, hey, so you live on the West Coast. Bill Walton lives on the West Coast. You guys did some games together. We're going to put you two together. And so I kind of had filed Mike's advice in my brain away about you have to stop him. And so the first game we did was Arizona, Oregon. Arizona was in the top 5. It's at Oregon. There's an upset. Arizona gets beat. They storm the court. But something happened that had not happened before. My phone is blowing up during the game and after the game. People I haven't talked to in a long time are texting like, this is hilarious. This is unique. And I think it's because Bill was being Bill. And I think I was being me, meaning there was some sarcasm in there.
Push
I
back a
would,
little bit here and there.
push back. And, Bill always encouraged that. He's like, he'd take his headset off. Keep coming at me. Don't stop. There's nothing you can ever say that will offend me. And I was like, because there were a couple times I'd take it off. I'm like, sorry, I shouldn't have said that. I'd make fun of his teeth or, call him, say he's held together by bolts and wires. I probably shouldn't have gone there. He goes, no, I love it. Keep coming at me. I love you, but don't tell anybody. That he'd always say that. So anyway, I think getting prepared to do a game with Bill was okay. I don't know what's coming because we never rehearsed anything. And Tim Sullivan, our longtime producer, and Bill would commiserate and they would never tell me anything. So I had no idea what was going to happen that night. We didn't rehearse an open. All the things you're not supposed to do in television, we did.
Right.
No production meetings, nothing. Just whatever they talked about and maybe Tim and I had talked about. Bill and I didn't speak much before the game because Bill wanted it that way. He wanted me, I'd walk into the gym for shoot around. He'd look at me. Who are you? I've seen you before. What's your name again? And that was it. Like if I got too close, he'd be like, go sit over there, sit over there. He wanted it all to be spontaneous and as if we had not seen each other since the last broadcast.
I love
Because
that.
he viewed it, and I've talked to a lot of his former teammates, he viewed it as he was playing. This was a game. He would stand up before the game. He would stretch during the national anthem. As soon as the anthem is over, he yells. You can hear him. Let's go. We got a game. Like he's getting ready to play.
Yeah.
He had all these energy chews and protein bars. Like it was preparing to play a game. And in some ways, as he would call me this sometimes, I was Kareem.
Okay.
We used to tape stuff and Bill would be bench pressing and he'd be yelling my name out. Dave, Kareem, Dave, Kareem. Like again, he's preparing to go to battle and I'm his friend, but I'm his adversary on the air. It's very strange. You won't find that anywhere else.
Correct, but that's what makes him so unique, and that's why I think for some reason, because he had an audience of people who knew him that were like my dad's age, who loved, and even when I was 12, 13, watching Bill Walton on the Celtics in 85 and 86, like I remember that Bill Walton, and then the 90s when I think you and I were both in college, like that's the time to watch him with Snapper Jones, right? And we're growing up. And then now, even as he's calling games, he's got this younger audience, this niche audience that has found him and sees him as just this weird, wild, wacky, all the players that loved him. And that's what I think made him so, I don't know, just delightful to watch and follow because he was so different than the norm. Like the fact that he would say, I love you, but don't tell anybody. Like that's just wacky, but it's awesome. Like there's a special softness to that too that probably a lot of people didn't get to see, especially you working with him every day. It was just awesome to think about. Because you did your last broadcast, it was the sign-off broadcast, right? In February or March with him. Did he give any inkling? Because I don't think a lot of people even knew he was sick, including myself, from just watching on social media or paying attention in the news. I didn't have any idea that he was that sick, if you will.
Well, two things. Let me go back. I'll get to that, but let me go back to your comment about how he related to so many people. Like Bill, he would, if you came up to Bill before the game, can I get a picture or can you sign this? And people did. He would say after the game. But he meant it. Like he would stay around after the game and you would be amazed, and not just the number of people, but the age difference. You'd have little kids, you'd have people
Wow.
our parents' age. I mean, you would have
Yeah.
all these different people that would come up to, and the players loved him. I mean, they got a kick out of it. I was
Hmm.
doing a game with him and Dick Vitale, and he and Dick just talked the whole game. I barely got a word in, but it
Yeah.
was fantastic. And
Lots of prayer
LeBron,
before that game, right? Lots of prayer before
oh
that.
yeah, and LeBron looks over early on because LeBron looks over at the table a lot during games, and he looks over at the table and he kind of looks at Bill and he just starts laughing, and he just puts his head down and just starts laughing.
Yeah.
Steph Curry, I remember after the Pac-12 tournament, the first one we had ever done, I had a Warriors game like 3 days later, and Bill's son Luke was an assistant on the team, and I walk in to shoot around, and Luke makes a beeline for me and puts his arms out like, come here, you need a hug. I've been there. I know. But we're about to do a sit-down interview with Steph, and we're sitting down, and Steph's getting mic'd up, Steph Curry. And out of nowhere, he goes, how come you didn't answer Bill's question? I was like, what? Excuse me? He goes, you didn't answer Bill's question. Again, this is Steph Curry we're talking about.
Right.
I'm like, what do you, Steph, I don't know what you're talking about. He goes, Bill asked you if you've ever been inside of a volcano while it's erupting, and you didn't answer the question. And I could just tell, like, the stuff that you and I laugh at,
Right.
they laughed at too. Like, there's just something about Bill
Hmm.
that people just find, and it's, I'm sure part of it is the guy was such a great player, but someone was like, he just doesn't care. He's just going to say whatever he wants. And there's something charming about that. And
Yeah.
so along those lines, getting to your story. So the last game I did with Bill was not a sign-off game. It was not supposed to be at all. This was January 31st. I think it was the 31st or Feb 1. It was Oregon at USC. And during the game, we were coming out of break showing some George Lucas. And I know you're a big Star Wars guy, so you'll appreciate this.
Very much so.
So showing, like, talking about George Lucas. And so I just kind of mess with Bill, because I used to always joke that, like, Bill, resembled Chewbacca. If you look at Bill from his early days when he had the long hair and the long beard. And so I said, isn't it true that you auditioned for the role to play Chewbacca? Now, we totally made this up. And Bill plays along, yes. And he keeps, because again, Bill just didn't care. But he just thought it was hilarious. He was like, yeah, I auditioned. He called him Chewy Baca. He kept saying, I auditioned for Chewy Baca, and, they went in a different direction, but I was the inspiration behind it. Well, of course, social media, this blows up. My phone is blowing up. People Magazine, there's articles being written now, right, refuting this. They're going back and finding old quotes to know George Lucas, Chewbacca was created in the image of his dog. It had nothing to do with Bill Walton. But again, Bill and I are just dying laughing at the fact we just made something up, and so Bill and I were having dinner after the game, and now Bill would always, if he was staying, would always say, can I buy you dinner after the game? He always did that.
That's awesome.
And he would invite people on the crew, and Bill always paid. And I used to joke with him, you should pay based on what you just did to me for 2 hours. But
yeah,
it was rare in that Lori, Bill's wife, would travel a lot, so she would usually come, or a producer would come, or Andy Hill, if we were in LA. Andy, who's one of Bill's best friends and played with him at UCLA, Andy would come. But this was just Bill and I, just the way it worked out. And so we were kind of laughing about that. And we actually were starting to talk a little bit about the future and, with the Pac-12 going away, what does next year look like? Well, that was the last time that I saw him. And, I'll never forget the conversation because, again, it was rare that it was just the two of us having dinner after the game.
Yeah.
And, things, I think, happened pretty quickly. And Bill, being a very private person, did not share a lot of details. I would have to get details through others. And, obviously didn't feel that it was something that, should be shared with anybody else. And so that's why things were kept quiet. And then, I think towards the end, there was a sense that things were getting to a point where, Bill was not going to recover. And obviously that, the day when I found out, that morning, was sad. The last, I was sending Bill texts, pictures of us. And again, sometimes he'd respond, sometimes he wouldn't, because Bill would get very private. And I think Bill felt embarrassed. He didn't like, and I've talked to others, same thing. I think he didn't want to burden people with what he was going through. Perhaps I'm not quite sure exactly why, but he was like that. I talked to people that, were close with him when he was going through what he went through when he was, couldn't walk, before
Right.
the spine surgery that saved his life. And, he had contemplated suicide, had been through, a lot, and just kind of shut down and isolated himself. And, that's just something that Bill did. And I'm not sure why, but, so yeah, that 3-month period, I kept thinking, well, Bill, knowing how much Bill hated to miss games, I knew it wasn't good.
Right.
And it was hard. It was hard doing the last few games without him, knowing that this was it. And, this unceremonious finish to what I thought was a pretty good 12-year run together. It was tough. I had a shirt that I had made and I sent Bill pictures of it. On the front, my wife and I made it, was a big picture of Bill with his mouth open and a lit cupcake going in. It was the picture when Bill ate the candle while it was lit. And on the back, it said, I survived 12 years working with Bill Walton, and all I got was his t-shirt, something like that.
Yes. Yeah.
And I never, I wanted to pull it out and wear it with Bill, because we would do that sometimes. He'd wear a certain shirt, or he'd have a present for me, or we'd do weird things on camera as surprises. And that was going to be kind of my surprise to him. And obviously it never happened. So it's weird. I still, think about it clearly. I went on vacation right after, and it was a needed vacation. I was shocked at how many people reached out to me. Like, again, I was such a small part of his life. But I think people knew we were close, or people, I don't know, or they just enjoyed the camaraderie that came through on the air. I'm not sure, but I was really surprised. I was not expecting that. As many people to reach out to me, because again, what did I really have to do with it?
Yeah,
But
but
it
you were
was
the public
heartwarming.
face with him, right? Like, you were the one that people saw on those broadcasts. So I think it's easy to think about, yeah, well, let's reach out to Larry Bird or Kevin McHale or some of the teammates he played with, Maurice Lucas or somebody like that. But you were the guy, especially for the younger generation, that's who they saw him with. So, I mean, for me, you were the first person I thought about. So I could see why that would be the case.
It certainly warmed my heart, because I love Bill so much, to feel like, to get a lot of texts and calls
Yeah,
from people of all walks of life, that, hopefully they enjoyed what they watched on the air.
totally. Yeah, I would recommend, if people listening want to just read a few more poignant thoughts. You posted some really cool things on social media and a few pictures and things like that on Twitter X that people can go check out and follow Dave Pasch and just see some more words. Especially, you were sharing those fairly immediately after we all found out about his passing. So it's weird being a believer too, just thinking about like grief and how to cope with loss and things like that. Do those things come to your mind at all? Not necessarily regarding Bill, but just regarding
Sure.
anybody close to us that might be, really personal to our lives. And then suddenly you realize how fleeting the life is. Like, Bill Walton lived, it felt like, life to the fullest, if you will. It felt like every day the guy was just like, I'm the luckiest man in the world. He would always say that. I went and listened to a podcast he recorded probably about a year ago, on one of the I don't forget what show it was. And just the next morning, as I'm on a walk, I found this podcast and I just listened to Bill Walton for 45 minutes. And I'm like, wow, I feel encouraged. I feel like this dude really understood like every day is a gift. And he had John Wooden as one of his mentors. So there's that. But I don't know. Do you have that thought sometimes, just thinking about, how short life is? And, I'm 50 years old now. And I think about, like, I'm on the second half of life here. And, Bill Walton was calling a game with you, and 4 months later, he wasn't around anymore. Like, things happen quickly.
Yeah, 100%. And, I mentioned earlier that, the gospel, is as much about as an announcement as anything. And it's an announcement, as we believe as Christians, of, Jesus overcoming death.
Yeah.
And that, death has been defeated. And, as believers, I mean, we saw Jesus's reaction to, you think of Lazarus, the reaction that Jesus had was a reaction of grief and sorrow because death is something that was not part of God's original plan. Death is something that is against um, creation. It's against what God's intent was for the world and for mankind. And obviously, death is a result of sin, but that death is done away with in Christ and that one day it will be fully and finally defeated. I mean, that's what we believe. It's not that we've, joined some religion that, hey, this is, a set of rules you do and, things will be okay. But we're called to be participants in the kingdom moving towards, that day when all things will be made right. So as Christians, we should grieve over death. And it's horrible and it's sad. And, it's been tough. It's been tough. Just thinking about that. And it's hard to, I was thinking about this the other day. I was talking to my wife. We were overseas traveling and I can't remember how it came up, but it was almost like I'd forgotten for a second, cause I was thinking about something and like, oh, Bill would love that. Yeah, it's something certainly as Christians, we should be thinking about a lot because, it's not, we shouldn't look at death as and collude with it and somehow feel like it's okay. No, it's against God's plan for human beings. God wants to be with us and wants to be with us for eternity. And we have that assurance through Christ and we need to hold on to that and live for that. And that's the great news that we need to be thinking about and how we want to communicate that to others, as opposed to some of the other things sometimes we tend to focus on when it comes to the Christian faith.
Yeah, that's really well said, Dave Pasch. As we wind down, I got to spend a minute here because we're running this in the summer. We're taping this in the summer and September hasn't hit us yet. But for you, this is the time to talk to Dave Pasch, because if I'm trying to call you, and I know you'd be gracious to try and find time somewhere during the season, but you are the voice of the Arizona Cardinals on the radio in Phoenix, obviously, but that's Sunday and sometimes Thursday or Monday night or whatever. But then you're also calling college football games for ESPN on Saturday. And aside from that, you're also doing college basketball games and NBA games once that part of the season starts. So it really is September to the playoffs, right? May into June sometimes, where you just nonstop are working. Can you give us a little snapshot of what your schedule is like as far as working? Let's just do the fall. College football, Saturdays, NFL games, Arizona Cardinal games on presumably Sundays.
So this is year 23 on the Cardinals and 21 at ESPN. So you can just think that's more than 2 decades of, I did my first few years at ESPN, did Fridays, but, for almost my entire time there, Saturday to Sunday. So you're doing a college game on Saturday, and then you've got to get either back home if it's a home game or wherever the Cardinals are that day. So it's like you're just living this fire hose life where you're just sucking through a fire hose because you're prepping, you're going, you're traveling, you're getting on site, you do your production meetings, you do the game, you turn around, you're trying to get out of the stadium, you're trying to get to an airport and trying to get to where you go, you land, sometimes it's Sunday morning, you go do the game, you fly back with a team, it's Sunday night, Monday morning, you're kind of exhausted, and then you regroup and you start your prep over again. So
let me stop you really quick, because if you're like, I'm a planner. I have my schedule for the next 3 months here. If I'm giving you a heads up on all the games on Saturday, that's a lot easier. But that's not always the case. You don't know what games you're doing from. What's the earliest you would know? Maybe a month sometimes?
No. So for college football, usually once, week 1, we'll know soon. Week 2 sometimes, but then after that, it's pretty much you find out. Now, sometimes you might find out Thursday the week before, but it's very rare. For the most part, we're finding out Sunday morning, where we're then going 3 days later, 4 days later for travel. So, and ESPN's always been good about looking at the Cardinal schedule, and sometimes we'll have conversation about would this work or not work. I had
Yeah.
one last year. We did the final Bedlam, Oklahoma State, and it was a 3:30 Eastern ABC game. And I had a game in Cleveland the next day, Cardinals Browns at 1 o'clock. And ESPN was kind enough to say, hey, this is challenging. What do you think? Not that, it would have, my opinion would have somehow made the difference, but it was, they were, thoughtful to reach out and ask. And
Yeah.
I didn't want to hurt the rest of the crew because that was a big game. It was a great game. The last Bedlam. I worked with Dusty Dvorak. He played at Oklahoma, great
Totally.
player at Oklahoma. So it's the last one. I'm like, let's do it. I'll figure it out. Well, there were some flight issues Sunday morning. I ended up long story short, walking into the booth about 10 minutes before kickoff.
Oh my God.
But it was
Yeah.
worth it because it was a great game. And look, I made it. I got there. It was great for our whole team to be a part of. But yeah, that part of it was stressful. The games are great. It's the getting to them. Like the Cardinals open in Buffalo. I don't know yet our college football assignment, but
Yeah.
you could have a game Friday and getting to Buffalo on time for Sunday could be challenging. So I'm curious to see where we are and how it all plays out.
At least it's Buffalo in September. That's all I'm saying. It's not
Yes.
Buffalo in December. That would have been the worst. But it's
As a
interesting.
Syracuse guy, I can relate to that 100%.
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
You grew up there or went to college there, so Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I just think maybe you could get some more Arizona State games on Saturday at home and then do a Cardinals game on Sunday. And have you had those moments where you've done an Arizona State game and then a Cardinals game the next day?
Yeah, that's happened. Yeah, and like I said, ESPN's been great. Bob Wischusen does something similar where he does college game and then he does the Jets on Sunday.
Yes.
There are other guys at ESPN, Wes Durham and Ish Schroff, Andre Ware that do both. So they're really good about working, trying to figure out, okay, how do the puzzle pieces fit? And that's happened where you've had an Arizona State game or you've had a college game. I can't remember what year it was, but I think there was a game where I had one at like USC on Saturday, and then the Cardinals were playing the Rams the next day. So it doesn't always play out that way, but there have been times that it's worked out.
All right. So describe your favorite, I don't know, not describe, but college football starting just in a couple of weeks as people are hearing this. So we're getting ramped up here in August for football. What's your favorite atmosphere or most memorable atmosphere for a college football game that you've been a part of that you can think of? Bedlam's pretty good, by the way, that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah. Look, a lot of the SEC venues, doing a game at LSU at nighttime. Miami and Florida, I don't know who's calling that game yet. For ESPN. But when we did it, Florida at Miami, I think it was like 2014 or 15, I was working with Brian Greasy at the time. And for those of you that have watched a Miami college game in the NFL stadium, sometimes you watch and, half the stadium's full and it's not a great environment. Well, we did Florida, Miami, and it was packed. It was early September. It was like 100 degrees, ridiculous humidity, and the stadium was full. And people were, it was a noon kick, and people were tailgating at like 8:39. The parking lot was packed. And maybe just because those teams are playing this year, that stands out. I remember doing the first Penn State game after Joe Paterno got fired and flying in on a Thursday, the day after there were riots. Over Joe Pub being fired, with everything that was going on there. And I remember that stadium, which had always been so loud, being so quiet. And it was so odd. But look, there's something, college football is a special sport because every game is a championship. Every game means so much. And I think with the expanded playoff, it's going to make the regular season even better.
Agree.
For so many more teams. So I love it. It's as good as it gets for sure.
Yeah, I'll give you three that I've been just as a fan to. Ohio State, which was just such a cool atmosphere. They beat Nebraska on a Saturday night game in 2016, 52-3 or something. They killed them on ABC. And then I went to Clemson a couple years ago to see that atmosphere. That was awesome. They beat your Syracuse Orangemen, so sorry for that one. But it was a great game and a great atmosphere. Those Clemson fans love it. And then last year, we went to Auburn. And I've been doing these college – we used to do NFL trips, my buddy Scott and I, for years. We go all these NFL stadiums. And now we've kind of settled down. Let's go to a college atmosphere that we would never think about going to and just experience it as outsiders to these people every single week that are living and dying by their team. And Auburn last year, we saw Auburn play Ole Miss. It was a good game. Ole Miss ended up winning, but it was amazing, all of the traditions and the different things that they put together before the game to do the walk to the stadium, and the fans are all there. It's just incredible. The tailgating. I've been to a lot of NFL experiences, even Arizona a couple times in the past, but nothing that I can find in the NFL, maybe Green Bay, compares to what college is like. Would you agree with that?
It's just so different.
It's just
It's
different.
so different. And
Yeah.
yeah, again, like especially the SEC, you do a game at Alabama and you think of all as you're coming into the stadium, like there's just you can feel it. You can feel the success that they've had because you're seeing how the fans are responded, how they're dressed, what they're doing.
Yeah.
It's such an event, and the passion, the intensity that's just surrounding it. And sometimes you feel it when you get in on a Thursday or when you're over there Friday meeting
Yes.
with the coaches. Like it's an environment and a sport that it's hard to compete with. And I love the NFL, and obviously the NFL, you're watching the best players in the world,
For
but
sure.
it is different. It's just different. And, I was fortunate enough to do two Michigan, Ohio State games. And obviously we don't have the Big Ten anymore, but just when you're a part of like that, or again, doing the last Bedlam, or we did Florida State, Miami a couple times. When there's a rivalry and you're there, you can just kind of feel it. You
Oh
feel
yeah.
the hatred. You see the way the players react and how the coaches are different. And it's so unique. It's so special. I remember doing the Michigan Ohio State game in 2011 when Michigan, finally beat them. They hadn't beaten them in so long, and what it was like in that stadium. And I was doing that game. I mentioned Chris Spielman earlier. I was doing that game with Chris, and Urban Meyer had been with us all year, and Urban was supposed to do the game with us, but he took himself off that game because he was about to become the Ohio State head coach, and it's the Ohio State Michigan game. And it was just, again, there was so much going on in it. That's another memory I have. And
Yeah.
so much of it, again, is like what's going on around the game. The game itself is obviously fantastic, but it's so much more than that.
Yeah, yeah. The Big House, by the way, that's going on the bucket list as another place to go check out sometime because it's just crazy from what I watch on TV. So, my last question for you was more of an encouragement question for those listening. I've been spending, I'm sure you get this too, a lot of people reaching out on social media, young people that are in broadcasting or media, particularly young believers who are wanting to go into this profession that you and I have been in for so many years and aren't quite sure how to do that. Like, I want to live my faith out and I want to be bold, but I also want to be, a broadcaster. I want to pursue my dream and be Dave Pasch or the next Kevin Harlan or Joe Buck or somebody like that. What encouragement would you have for those who are pursuing the dream or want to pursue the dream, but also stay true to their faith?
I don't think there's any reason why you cannot stay true to your faith and be in this business. In fact, we should be. That's what we should be doing. We should be um, placed wherever God wants to place us, and being in whatever field we're called to be in,
That's right.
and where our talents are. And being in a silo and isolating, that's not going to, as again using that term, kingdom participants, that's not going to do anything. We need to be out, being salt and light and being used and using our talents. And again, there's nothing wrong with trying to be successful in this business and being the best that you can be in this business. And again, I think if you are interested in becoming a broadcaster, or trying to get to a place like an ESPN, you certainly can be yourself.
Yes.
There's a way to do that. There's a way to handle yourself as a Christian in this business. And that should be exciting and encouraging for us, to do that, because, I mentioned my relationship with Bill. I get close with the people I work with. They become kind of your second family because you spend so much time with them. And, this is all about the relationships. And, that's an exciting thing to be able to build and develop those relationships, because that's where the impact can be felt. And I think if you're somebody that wants to do this, you just should go for it and understand that you don't have to, compromise. You don't have to, change or be untrue to Scripture and
Right.
what the Holy Spirit is doing in your heart. I think sometimes I know early on, I think I used to question like, well, maybe I'm not supposed to be doing this. But again, I was thinking more along the lines of, well, there are things maybe I don't like or disagree with. And so I shouldn't be a part of it, which is kind of silly. And it's not at all, again, a biblical worldview.
Yeah.
We're supposed to be in all of it, deep in it. And
not of it, but in it. That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so, I'd say 100% go for it.
No, that's good. That's good advice. Dave Pasch, thank you, my friend. I'm glad we found this time now because I know in about 3 weeks it's about to get insane, and can't wait to see you on the calls on Saturday on ESPN, and on Sundays we can listen to you online. I know I have Sirius XM, so I like to listen to the local broadcasts, and you can listen to Dave Pasch doing Arizona Cardinal games, and then an NBA season and a college basketball season. Don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves here. You're trying to just focus on football for now, but thank you for the time. I really appreciate it. I'm glad we got to catch up, and I'm really just thankful that we were able to have this conversation. So thanks for joining us.
I appreciate your ministry, Jason, and your friendship, and my pleasure. Always great to catch up, man.
Hey, thanks for watching Sports Spectrum here on YouTube. You can click our next video, or you can check out our website, sportsspectrum.com.